is a springtime rain, to have a friend right in your corner. Your heart will feel a little warmer. Tender loving care, tender loving care. Each warm and friendly touch lets someone know you care so much. Tender loving care, tender loving care.
Hi, I'm Dr. Greenbrier Almond, and welcome to another program of Tender Loving Care. Each week on Channel 3, for over 30 years, we've been talking about this interface between Christianity and medicine. And tonight, surely I have a topic that will fulfill that bill. I have here a picture of Dr. Kent Brantley. Dr. Brantley has been a missionary doctor in Liberia, and he contracted the Ebola virus, the most deadly virus in the world. And 70 to 90% of those who contract this virus die. And he did survive. He was brought back to America on August the 2nd and was in Emory Hospital for about 3 weeks, had blood transfusions and had all sorts of care, but eventually his body fought off the virus and he survived. I want to tell a little bit about his story because I was just with Dr. Brantley last weekend. That is the middle of October 2016, when my wife Aracely and I went to the Billy Graham Cove for a medical missionary conference World Medical Mission puts on every year, called Prescription for Renewal. And Dr. Brantley had gone out to Africa under the auspices of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and represents one of 40 or more doctors that they have sent out in what they call the post-residency 2-year program. And he had planned to be a missionary doctor. In fact, he was a Bible student in Texas years and years ago, over 10 years ago, and he felt God called him to be a missionary doctor, and he graduated from his Bible school training, went on to medical school, became a doctor, and then took this appointment in Africa. Liberia, if you remember, has been under revolution and fighting for about 20 years, and the country is totally devastated anyway. There's about 1.1 doctor for every 10,000 citizens, or 1 doctor for every 100,000 citizens. That would be different than America, where you might have 1 doctor for every 1,000 citizens. And so they have great medical needs, but also, of course, they will accept gospel preaching, and that's something that Dr. Brantley definitely wanted to combine. As on the cover here, as his quote is, "God saved my life," and he firmly believes that he has a mission now will be different than just being a family doctor, but he will be talking about how God has saved his life, and of course what's next. Dr. Brantley was a very brave man. He went to Africa with his wife and 2 children. Fortunately, and God is good all the time, his wife and children had planned to come back to America in the summertime for a wedding, and they would be with friends. And so Dr. Brantley was alone, and he was managing the Ebola unit that they have at their hospital. And it was a circumstance they hadn't planned on, but in March, the Ebola virus erupted on the world. It was not found for 40 days in Liberia. They thought they had eradicated it because the life cycle was 21 days, and then it would go back into quiescence, but you can get it over a 21-day period. Anyway, they gone 40 days without the Ebola in Liberia, and then it erupted. And now estimations are that in West Africa soon there'll be 10,000 patients a week coming down with Ebola. There already have been 8,000 cases, 4,000 deaths, and this is a multiplying effect since this is a very populated area of the country, and Ebola has mutated some 300 times and is getting more virulent. As you know, if you're following the news, and we're not sure exactly when this will broadcast, but Ebola is now in America, and there have been at least 2 nursing healthcare workers at the Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas, Texas, who have contracted Ebola from taking care of a man who left Liberia, probably with the virus. He lied, he didn't tell authorities as he boarded the airplane his contacts, and he came down with the virus in Texas, and then it has spread to 2 nursing staff people at Presbyterian Hospital, and there'll probably be more. This is the way the virus works. Well, I want to take some time today and talk with you about the facts, the pathophysiology, the doctor part of Ebola virus. I thought this would be of interest to my audience, since I went in part to the Missionary Medicine Conference in North Carolina at the Billy Graham Cove to learn more about Ebola, malaria, other diseases that are out there, because as a doctor, my wife and I remain interested in missions, particularly in the Philippines. Well, this is an update, and I'll try to share this and try to put it in layman's language. The virus is part of the filovirus based on its shape. It's a filament. It's a long cord. And it causes hemorrhagic fever. There are other diseases that cause this. But basically what happens is the body's own reaction as it tries to kill the virus kills the person who carries the virus. In other words, the blood vessels themselves begin to disintegrate, and there's internal bleeding. There'll be bleeding from the gut, bleeding from the GU system, all sorts of internal bleeding. Dr. Brantley had 3 blood transfusions. He himself, if you follow the news again, is now giving some blood transfusions as a survivor with antibodies in his body to other people who have the disorder and are suffering. And hopefully there's no treatment for this. There's no medicine, no treatment. It's all supportive care. But hopefully by giving this blood transfusion, as the people bleed inside, Dr. Brantley's blood and the antibodies that he possesses will help defeat the virus, or at least sustain the person until their own body can fight it off. But it's a part of a hemorrhagic fever syndrome. Dr. Brantley described for us how he had all sorts of maculopapular rash under his skin. He was bleeding under his skin. You can imagine little boo-boo, we would call them, my granddaughters would call them, as they get a little bruise. That's a little bit of blood under the skin. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's purple, and it fades quickly, and it's a very small area of the body. You can imagine something like where the blood has collected under the skin all over the body. So Dr. Brantley looked like a beet. He looked very strange, not when we saw him, but pictures back in August when he was at his sickest. Among the other things that happen when the people have this virus is it causes this hemorrhage, and people then get a fulminant septic shock. The blood will drop, hemoglobin will drop. Sometimes we give blood transfusion in the surgery if the hemoglobin gets below 8 grams. But if it's down to 4 or 3 or 2 or 1, then you're in shock, and then people die because they're just bleeding out internally. There's no proven vaccine, no proven treatment at this time. There are experimental treatments. So this particular brand or form of the virus that Dr. Brantley came down with in Liberia and West Africa is the Zaire form. It came out of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1976, and this has been spreading since then. There's seasons of the flu like we have in the United States every year, and there's seasons when the virus is active and seasons when it goes back into its animal passengers, the fruit bat and others, and then it's not involved with humans. The difference this time is that it has begun to spread inside highly populated areas. And once that happens, then it spreads from person to person. In fact, part of the problem now is there are 4,000 deaths. There's other people that have the disease. Family members have to care for the body of someone if they die in Africa. There are no funeral homes. There's no other ways to care for the body. So exposure to body fluids can get a person sick. Sweat, urine, feces, the diarrhea, the vomiting, so forth. All those things. If you wash off a body and care for a body, even to prepare it for burial, would expose someone. Of course, if you're caring for the sick, you're exposed also, and this is apparently how the healthcare nurses have come down with this. But the Zaire strain is the most virulent. There is a Sudan strain, an Ivory Coast strain, a Bungbuya strain, and a Reston strain. Those are all varieties that have been identified. There's some 300 different varieties, though. Harvard University has been studying this for a number of years. But unfortunately, as it mutates, there's no vaccine or no way to care for it. I want to share with you a little bit. I have the medical talk in front of me, so I'm trying not to read it to you, but just to reference it so I can explain this to you. But the source of the organism can be alive inside a fruit bat for some time. And the fruit bat is something, well, there's a lot of fruit in Africa, you know, pineapples and coconuts and bananas and so forth. And so it thrives and it's alive and it's around, and it can infest the gorilla, the chimpanzee, there's a shrew, there's sheep, horses, models like animals like this it can infect. And then those animals can die. This gave me some concern when I heard that, because we had the privilege a number of years ago to visit Rwanda, and we went up into the Volcanic National Park and saw a family of gorillas. They live isolated from humans, and of course they're subject to infections, but this would be horrible if the gorillas actually get the Ebola virus someday, and they could wipe them out. The other thing that we fear, I mean, how about the spread of this is not necessarily to animals, but the most populated nation in Africa is Nigeria, 160 million people. And Lagos has 25 million people. And there has been a man who left Liberia and went over into Nigeria and has infected perhaps 8 people. So the fear is that this is now going to spread rapidly. You heard the projections on the TV and so forth, the newscast. There could be hundreds of thousands of deaths when this is all over. This is quite an epidemic, quite a plague. But so spreading from human to human is definitely a possibility. I mentioned the close contacts that people have, blood, secretions, all sorts of ways to spread it. Even if it's on material, it can live for several days. So something wet, and again, you know, we all have wet towels, don't we, around our house. I use the same towel for several days. We customarily, you know, we have raincoats. We're out in the rain. We hang them in a closet. They dry out. It's okay, but you know, a virus can live in something damp like that. And so if people have this virus exposed and they're in their home, they could keep it for a while. Frontier Airlines is probably going to have a great deal of difficulty eradicating if this young lady who flew to Cleveland, Ohio last weekend, and then when she got home, she got sick and she has Ebola virus now. If she you know, had her clothes, she had her wet hair, you know, she sat in a chair in the airline, so forth. How can they eradicate that? America, under the president, has sent 3,000 soldiers to West Africa to build Ebola shelters. They just don't have hospitals. They don't have space to keep people, but they're going to have to isolate them and quarantine people. And our soldiers will be exposed one way or another, hopefully not to die of Ebola, but just being in West Africa, the virus will get on the airplane, and how do we decontaminate things like that? So we have all sorts of issues of contact. Various consumptions of food. There's something called bush meat. It's probably not very appetizing, but the African, because they are hungry, they may eat dead meat that maybe just died, but this could have died because of the Ebola virus. Or they could be eating a fruit bat, you know, and that would be bush meat, they call it, and that could be infected. And of course, touching objects that have been in contact with someone. Mention the organs of the body. Receiving blood transfusions are necessary. The liver becomes involved early on. The hepatocytes, the liver cells, are damaged, so people can have liver failure. They can have renal failure. The African who came apparently had renal dialysis. He had kidney failure, and of course, all that equipment's also contaminated. So this is a very dangerous proposition we're into for the spread. There's the endothelial cells, the coating cells of the blood vessels. They can all deteriorate. The phagocytes, the blood cells that eat the bad cells, they can eat the bad cells, but then they can be contaminated at the same time. Some of the suggestions of how this develops, you notice that they mention this always in the news reports that the people are contaminated when they have a fever. And that's true. That's when the virus will be spread, and so people have to be in quarantine as soon as they develop a fever. However, there have been at least 4 people now who have the disease and they didn't have a fever. In other words, their blood was tested, they're infected with Ebola, but they don't have a fever. Or perhaps it's a low-grade fever, like the healthcare worker who flew to Cleveland. She maybe had a fever of like 99 degrees Fahrenheit, just a slight fever, but she was infected. So there's a fever, that's one of the first signs, a sore throat, severe headache, muscle pain. So it just sounds like the flu, doesn't it? Intense weakness, vomiting, diarrhea, impaired liver and kidney function, internal and external bleeding. Dr. Brantley said that when he got his fever, he realized that he may be exposed. He feels that he got this not because of his Ebola patients. He was gowning up and using universal precautions not to get infected on the Ebola ward. But he was also called to the emergency room of his hospital, and he had to take care of several OB patients. And these women who were carrying a baby were probably infected. They didn't know it. They were coming to have OB care, but they probably infected Dr. Brantley, and he feels that's where he got it. So it can spread through various contacts and various symptoms that people may have. And it does give a flu-like syndrome at first, but then it spreads. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the virus. The viruses are mutating all the time. We've had very virulent strains of the flu, for example. I was always taught about the 1918 flu, and then there were a lot of people when I was growing up who had Parkinson's disease. Most of those have died, but they were carriers, and they had evidence that they had been infected with the 1918 flu strain. So that was a particularly virulent strain with hundreds of thousands of deaths in America. So viruses can mutate, and this can happen at any time. It just happens that the Ebola is now the most virulent, the most severe virus we've ever had. But it began, as far as we can tell, in 1976. There's been numerous outbreaks, but most of them have been in the bush area, out in the jungle, and it's infected a village or two. Perhaps all those people, half the people, 3/4 of the people would die, but those who survived then had some protection and could go on with their life. But it did not spread into the cities, and certainly it didn't spread internationally. And by the way, it's also being, looks like it's in Brazil now. Dr. Brantley was very concerned. There's a lot of Chinese who are working in West Africa doing development projects. They like to do wells and water and pipes and so forth. They want to help the development of the people, and they maybe would develop a system and then sell the water and so forth back to the West Africans. So they do it as a business. But anyway, they are probably going to be all leaving West Africa and going back to China. So undoubtedly it'll spread over to Asia and other places like this. At least that is the fear. So we've had numerous outbreaks, but most of them have not been worldwide or gone out of the sub-Saharan African region. The number of outbreaks have been increasing since 1990. And usually the other thing that bugs can do, they can be infective, and then they can get weaker strains over time. But the Ebola virus seems to be going the other way. I mentioned the reservoirs. How does it stay alive season after season? Well, the fruit bat is one of those things. Monkeys, forest antelope, porcupines, chimpanzees, and the gorillas can all keep it alive inside their body. Okay. The transmission is through the body fluids. We've mentioned some of this. There's some repetition here. Care of the family members. Again, they don't have hospitals. They care for their family members at home. If they have to have if there's a corpse, they have to bury the corpse. They don't have funeral homes and things like this. Healthcare workers have been abundantly infected in Africa. They don't have the universal precautions that we have. And even the Nebraskan hospital and the Emory hospital, both those had extreme isolation units, and that's good. But apparently the Dallas hospital did not have the precautions they needed, and it's being spread through their workers. It can be through inanimate objects for some time, up to 6 days or so, just on wet clothing and things of that nature. Okay. So various other ways it could be spread, but I'm hitting some highlights here. The pathogenesis, I want to talk a little bit about that. What happens inside the body with the Ebola virus? It's actually the immune response of the host, the one who gets infected, that actually kills the person. The virus itself, if it were just to look at it, it would not be that harsh, but once it's inside the body tries to kill it. And by doing that, a person begins to bleed internally and goes into shock, and they die. So it's the immune response itself that is killing them. And sometimes maybe the treatment down the road would be to keep the immune response from being so marked, and that may help a person. There's a tissue factor, TF it's called, that's released by a viral-laden macrophage, and they can change the coagulation of the body. So the fluids start to spread through ruptures in the walls and so forth, and it finally goes to shock. Interesting, they think the cycle is 2 days to 21 days. And so they want to keep people away from everyone. They want to be in quarantine for 42 days, double the normal time of the virus. But in Liberia, they had it quarantined for 40 days, people quarantined for 40 days back last March, and then it still escaped in the last 2 days. So perhaps it lives longer than we think. But we don't know. We don't know. These are a lot of things we don't know about the virus. The two people that became infected in Dallas thought they had taken all the precautions that the Center for Disease Control recommended, but yet they still got the disease. One good thing is it's not like malaria, which is rampant and kills millions, and tuberculosis, which kills millions in the world every year already, is that it's not airborne. However, that's not clear that it couldn't be on a cough if it's just a couple meters away, just 6 feet away or so. Maybe it could spread in the air. So again, if you're on an airplane or some close quarters, that could be dangerous for people. Dr. Brantley said he got so weak that he could not even stand up. He couldn't stand up to go to the bathroom. He couldn't control his bowel or bladder. He was just prostrate. He just had to lay. He was almost, in fact, he was in a stupor. He didn't know what happened several days. And only the people who cared for him, who talked with him later about how things were, could describe, and he might be able to remember some things. Some people get subconjunctival hemorrhages, that is in the eyes, the white of the eyes. That could be hemorrhaged, as well as, of course, under the skin. And anytime they had to start an IV or something, at the venipuncture site, as they started the IV, the person would bleed a lot, right, even at that site. So this is this bleeding and shock syndrome that kills people eventually. They have some diagnostic tests. Obviously, they can do antibody tests, and that would identify who is positive for the virus. They can do viral cultures to see how many viruses there are in the person. The people who have it, if they get other blood tests, they may have very low white blood cell count, leukopenia, maybe down to 1,000, and we might expect it to be 8 or 10,000 or 12,000. Thrombocytopenia, the platelets themselves are very low. The liver function tests go very high as the liver fails. The coagulation test, the bleeding test are abnormal, and protein becomes abnormal, and the salt balance becomes abnormal. So that everything is out of whack, and as the people get this and get sicker and sicker. usually takes about 3 days from, if a person has a fever, then in 3 days they're going to turn positive. But again, there are some people who are positive already for the blood test for the virus without a fever. So what is the care? Well, it's to take good care of the person, keep them alive, IV care, blood transfusions. They did with renal failure, they did try to do the renal dialysis to keep the African alive in Texas. There are other things like this they can do to support life, but it's the idea of keeping the person alive until the body can fight off the disease. The presence can be present for up to 3 months after a person has it, and therefore they could be, for example, in the other organs of the body, like a male, the testes, it could be there for 3 months. So it could be submitted or transmitted through a sexual contact also. We just don't know that for sure, how many people that might be the way it's spread, like AIDS is spread. And so it's a big problem. This might be the plague that the Bible talks about, in Revelations. There have been big plagues before, of course, in the Middle Ages. 1/3 of Europe died, and that was horrible. But so there have been other plagues like this, but this might be, at least we could say this one is going to be a biblical proportion. One of the reasons to talk about it here on our show and to keep you informed. Another treatment that Dr. Brantley had was called a ZMapp. It's a cocktail of monoclonal antibodies, and so various people have had various viruses, and then they just try to just give them as much support as they can. And then Dr. Brantley did have a concoction it was a so small amount it's only been given to one person. There's some mouse antibodies that then were grown on a tobacco leaf and multiplied inside the tobacco leaf, and there was enough for Dr. Brantley to have a dose of that, and that's an experimental treatment, but not anything that can be given to people in general. The idea of personal protective equipment is going to be something big. Dr. Friedman, who's the doctor in charge of the Center for Disease Control, is emphasizing that we all have to use or consider the protective clothes if we're going to be around someone, and if they triple glove. Our daughter Maria, who's a doctor, was saying they recommend triple gloving, but you try to take off 3 sets of gloves. It's hard to do without touching the gloves that may be contaminated. So you have to be very careful, even in coming out of you might be protected from the virus while you're in the room, but try to get out of the clothing without contaminating yourself. It's going to be very hard to do. So one of the hopes would be, maybe the prayers would be, that this will attenuate itself, that the virus will be like the bird flu that came out of China a couple years ago. It was dangerous, but then it didn't seem to stay dangerous. Even inside the birds, it became less and less virulent, and certainly didn't spread around the world like we thought it might. But in reality, we're going to have to isolate people. And what Dr. Brantley said is it's going to be impossible if it's inside a hospital. And now we know it's in the Texas hospital. We know it's in the Emory Hospital. It's in the Nebraska hospital. It's going to be impossible for a hospital to treat 2 kinds of patients. They're going to just have to have more and more Ebola patients and no other kind of patient. It's just too risky to get people exposed in a hospital setting. And that's going to be a problem. Obviously, there's going to be centers in the United States where people will be treated for their Ebola. When our Army goes to Africa, they're going to build a lot of buildings. They're going to isolate people in those buildings. Hopefully that will work too. Well, until the next time, this is Dr. Greenbrier Almond. Sorry to have a gruesome topic like Ebola, but I thought after meeting Dr. Kent Brantley and realizing that Ebola is with us, that it's important to talk about it here on our local show. But we can still give tender, loving care. We can still pray for one another. And if you are a supporter of missionary medicine, this would be a good time to give to your church or an organization that's helping the missionary doctors out there who are doing everything they can. Until the next time, take care, and special thanks to Channel 3 for the opportunity to come your way. Good evening.
Stories of a West Virginia Doctor, written by Dr. Harold D. Allman. A collection of 55 short stories about his experience as a small-town doctor in central West Virginia. And Tender Loving Care, Stories from a West Virginia Doctor, Volume 2, written by Dr. Greenbrier Allman, using videotapes to write 70 additional stories of his father's very colorful life as a small-town doctor. They can be found for purchase at Amazon.com and most local bookstores. Tune into Channel 3 Buckhannon for Tender Loving Care with Dr. Greenbrier Allman, where he talks about the connection between Christianity and medicine.